Have you guys ever wondered in Honkai Star Rail, how has the meta evolved in the past 2 to 3 years of you picking up this game? Hey guys. Hey guys, MrPokke here. And today we're going to be taking a look at what is potentially a super interesting throwback for this particular post, featuring a 2024 December 8th TikTok screenshot where a user on TikTok has made this particular prediction, and it goes along the lines of this. It's 2026, Acheron, Facial, and Firefly drop to tier 4. Himeko is dead. Jing Yuan gets his 739,000 billion buffs. Bosses have 10 million HP with 3 phases each. The meta is now mono elements. Robin is still meta. Ranmei is a... Okay, I don't really know what the thing says. Ranmei is something. 4 stars are no longer usable. Elation Path is here. Elation Path is here. HP scaling characters are getting released left and right. And Blade is now tier 0, right? So I think the general thought process on how this came to be is, number one, I am pretty sure bro works in Hoyoverse before, because especially the last 3 lines, they are like eerily accurate. Specifically Elation, HP scalers, and the tier 0 Blade. Okay, maybe bro missed out an M, but I think the general sentiments is pretty much gonna be there, right? But it is not about bro's prediction that I wanna discuss, since I personally think around this ballpark, which is 2024, it is around the time frame of before Sunday. Yeah, I think this was around 2.5 if I'm not mistaken. 2.5 or like 2.6. So the most important thing that I want to discuss is this right here. Acheron, Facial, Firefly drops to tier 4. Robin is still meta. I don't know what a Ranmei thing is, but a very interesting sentiment that I'm gonna be wondering over here is, I noticed something in Honkai Star Rail. You know, there's this saying that a support is way more important than DPS, right? I think we have heard this like since day one. Always commit for supports. It's because DPSs are really replaceable since day one. And you can kind of take this concept and apply it to a lot of like different gacha games, where most of the time your support slot is relatively fixed, but yet they can work with a lot of different units. You can see in Zenless, right? Astra Yao, Core, right? Yuzuha, right? They're all really universal in their respective class, right? Wawa's Shorekeeper, right? Genshin's Farina. I think Farina's pretty good, right? Yeah, Genshin's Farina, but Burnett, right? Burnett. So those are like great examples of how like supports have seen a lot of like appearance across a lot of teams. However, I feel that this post made me think quite a bit for me to come up with this conclusion right here today for you guys, which is this formula might not necessarily always hold true in Honkai Star Rail. And the reason is because team building in HSR is less so focused on what the support is able to provide. Like, for example, I think generally if you think about support, you want to get like some kind of damage buff, right? Increase your damage, right? Maybe an attack buff, HP buff, damage percent, res pen. These kind of like universal multipliers that can be applied to pretty much anyone that can use those buffs. Because it's straight up, if you deal more damage for XYZ unit, then you can slot in XYZ unit with set support. But in HSR, I feel this concept is not as prevalent, especially now that we have this sentiment from back then where all DPS will be homeless. Right? It is a matter of time before an older version's DPS will be power crept by the newer version's DPS. But yet, you can use those newer version DPS with your older version supports. Because supports are universal, and supports can buff everyone. Fast forward to 2026. If you have been playing HSR for the past couple months, you will notice that this sentiment is pretty far from the reality of the shape of our current meta right now. So let's just say this thing right here, right? Robin is still meta. Nowadays, I don't even think Robin has a single team that you can slap on freely, because you have the alternative being a better wheelchair combinations with things like M-Blade Tribby as well as Asheville. Right? You could maybe still run Robin if you don't have access to those other units, but the experiences you are gonna be getting with Robin on other DPS is way more restrictive. You're probably not gonna run Robin with Remembrance Flagship. You're probably not gonna be running Robin with Elation. You're probably not running Robin with Break, right? Maybe DOT, but I think nowadays that is still very, very debatable. So this whole support is very, very universal, and it can last a very long time. Robin is a very good example of why that is not the case in HSR, and that ties back into the first line, which is the version 2 DPSs drop the tier 4. To a certain extent, they are worse in comparison to the newer DPS. Right, the real tier 0 units nowadays, it's either the flagships from version 3 and 4 or Firefly, who got the special preferential treatment. That is the only unit out of these three to actually get a Nova Flare before Nova Flare was even a concept back in 2024, and no one could have seen that coming. But even if they are not gonna be as good as these tier 0 units, they are still really, really strong if you give them a team that is coming out from a later version, specifically the supports that are coming out from a later version. So this is like the biggest point that I come to realize from reading this post, which is HSR's meta shifting. While newer DPSs will definitely perform older DPSs, they go about with a different formula in the forms of each version's universal wheelchair sub DPS, wheelchair support, to allow you to continuously use your older DPSs, despite the fact that they are probably gonna be outshined by the newer DPS. So if you want to use units like Acheron and Facial, which did not get a Nova Flare, for 2-cost upgrade, giving them an Azure and Blade, or in Acheron's case, a Blade plus a E1 Tribute, whatever it's gonna be, and especially, for example, a more universal like E1 Tribute for the true damage, you can still make these old DPSs perform relatively well compared to majority of the, I would say, more casual player base that have decided to just not commit for their DPSs. And that is where I think HSR makes a very distinct, different pooling process, because you could just keep pooling for the newer versions DPS, right? You absolutely could. But along with the newer versions DPS, it also comes with their respective costs as well. You don't just pool for one Silver Wolf and skip Yao Guang, right? You surely didn't, right? You definitely didn't, right? You don't just pool for one Castress and you skip like Everlight, Cyrene, right? Hyacinth. No matter what team you want to pool in HSR, whether it be an older DPS or a newer DPS, the cost that is tied to your investments in each of these teams, you can't really not pool them. Which also basically just means at this point, if you were to continue playing with older DPSs, you theoretically don't really waste any more Stellar Jades than someone else who pulls for newer DPSs. Because if someone wants to start a new team, one calls for the DPS, one calls for the S1, one calls for the E1, maybe for an E2, get another support, get another sustain, maybe an E2 support, right? So that brand new team is eventually gonna take up a lot of your costs anyways. Compared to if you already pulled for an older DPS, the one that gets replaced is not the DPS, but actually the support. Which I just thought it was actually super interesting that this is the shape of like HSR's meta. So you can still run those older DPS, except that you have to invest in maybe 1 or 2 costs to get a updated version of a support that somehow still works with these older DPSs, right? We are using Akron facial as an example here, but of course, this doesn't really apply to every single DPS as well. Like for example, what happened to Jing Liu, or Green Blade, or Argenti, right? Jing Yuan, Yun Li, not all DPS are built the same. And if you were a player that really liked playing with those other DPSs, not mentioned here, it is a reality that I think players would have to come to accept that out of all of these HSR character banner life cycles, some units will inevitably have a higher role in the story, in the marketing, and therefore the meta, right? It's like if you were to like go to like a movie or like a play, it's very obvious who is the protagonist, right? And who is like the protagonist's best friend. And then who is the random uncle that appears for like 30 seconds and you never see him again, right? So because of those things, if you really play HSR as a game for like Wi-Fi Husbando, just play whatever you want. But in terms of like meta chasers, right? Like you want to make the best use of your Stellar Jades to pull for units that can last a longer period of time. I do feel that the thought process of DPS is more replaceable supports is actually the opposite within HSR, alright? And then this will then bring me to the big elephant in the room, which is I have a slight concern with the way that HSR plans their flagship paths, which I talked about a little bit just now on stream. I personally don't think it's a very sustainable way to release a new path with its new units in that path to be hyper specific. You only want to play with units in that specific path, and the moment you deviate from that specific path, the performance drops off by a considerable amount. So for example, Caster's Remembrance as well as Elation Silverwolf, right? Or Evanescence, I guess. My Evanescence is not as much, but definitely still a little bit there. Because by releasing hyper-specific versions of a team in every single patch, you are leaving less rooms for replacements in the support department. The reason why version 2 DPS has been like generally doing quite well is because the support slots for, let's just say for example, Facial and Akron is very flexible, right? You don't need to pull a Facial path or like, what was like the Hule path, alright? Or like Akron, imagine pulling only for like the Self-Annihilator path, alright? The Grand Duke Inferno path. Like it wouldn't really work because it's very, very specific. Firefly, on the other hand, is a little bit more of a special case because Break is a more niche team comp, a little bit comparable to like DOT, but it is still quite flexible because their paths can be fluid, right? You are not forced to run Destruction, Nihility, Harmony, whatever it's going to be. So if a newer version of supports can come out for any Break DPS, they can still slot into a Firefly team and can continue to use Firefly depending on how they're going to be. Like, who knows if we are going to be able to get like a, let's say DOT for example, right? Maybe other DOT units can also join the fray because all of these things are interchangeable, which is a little bit of like a double-edged sword. On one hand, if you make a path hyper-specific, they will do very, very well when you collect all the pieces together, right? 4 cost elation with E0, 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 then later on you upgrade to 8 cost, and then 12 cost, and then 16 cost. You can make their synergy be absolutely exceptional, and there will be very unlikely that that original roster of units that you put today will get replaced in the future, because they are designed to be hyper-specific. But the flip side of that is, if you want to play other units in your old team, it is way more difficult to change them out. So if you already put for a Remembrance team, right, and you committed for like an E2 Caceres, right, E2 Ebonite, right, E2 Cyrene, the odds of you replacing any one of them is very hard. And since you are not gonna replace them as easily compared to version 2 units like Aircraft and Fei Xiao, where their teammates are way more flexible. Like Fei Xiao right now don't even recognize Topaz, don't even recognize Aventurine, and don't even recognize Barbin anymore. The OG Fart team is like long gone, right? But she is still able to do very, very well in our endgame content because she's flexible. Same thing for Acheron. Who the fuck is OG Silver Wolf, right? Nobody knows who is Pella, who is Jiao Qiu, and yet Acheron is still going to be doing very well with the release of Emblem. So if in the future where version 5, version 6, all of these other newer supports and sub DPS can come out for DPS units in particular, the more hyper-focused team comps with like Elation and Remembrance, it will be way harder for them to benefit. That also means if you want vertical investments for these kind of teams, you're either looking at additional items and light cones, or just praying for the Nova Flare, which is basically what happened to Firefly, right? Firefly not just got a dedicated ass break support, she also had an entire Nova Flare that made her E2 way more accessible to have no cooldown. And it is also another sign where the devs want players to stick with investing on Firefly specific to the break team. Who is Rebel, who is Wookhill, nobody knows, but Firefly is that main push out of all of the breakers, right? So going forward, if they were to release another Elation unit in like version 6 or version 7, what if you already put that complete Elation team right now, right? You have a Silver Wolf, you have a Yao Guang, right? I'm not sure if Nihilux is gonna be, okay, let's just assume Nihilux is like the Elation sustain, and then you have Sparksy, right? What if they release another Elation unit sometime down in the future? Are you able to take out the other piece? Or what if they don't even release another Elation unit anymore because we're no longer playing Arcadia? Will we get another Remembrance unit? Like, it's not impossible for them to release, but it is way more of a lower probability compared to more flexible units in team building, like supports and sub DPSs for Aircraft and Fei Xiao, or even DOT, or Break, or even Archer, who knows, right? So that is going to be a quick little 2 cents on I guess a good title of this video is like bracket supports last longer than DPS, right, in quotation marks, because I feel that HSR is a little bit more in the opposite scenario. Before we wrap up this video though, there's this one last thing, that is 4 stars. All right, 4 stars in HSR. I feel that at this point, HSR has basically removed the entirety of more 4-star units. In exchange, more 5 stars that are free and made more accessible to the player base. This really depends on what those units actually do for you. Like for example, if they give, I would take a free Sparkle over a new 4-star DPS any day. But if the newer units in the terms of 5-star doesn't really get as much value for me on my account, then I would rather have an added option of that set 4-star. Of course, we could have both, right? Why not just get both more free 5 stars and more 4 stars added to the roster? I think that's really more of a for fun kind of thing, because what I've noticed majority of the time is that for every 10 4-star converters, maybe 2 or 3 is like pretty decent. Because majority of the 4 stars are like DPS creators that will probably not really see a lot of it. Like, if they release another Hook, another QQ, right, another Danheng, right, another, I guess Xue Yi is not bad. It's kind of unique. It is like more of like a fun way to play them, but it is by no means necessary to save my account, especially if I'm gonna be a free-to-play, right? So that is pretty much gonna be that. Oh wait, actually I got one last thing. Okay, I swear there's one last thing. The next path in HSR. Because what I've noticed is that every single version we have a new path for MC, right? We had Harmony, which was really good for break. RMC, which was relatively general, right? Relatively general. Then now EMC dedicated for EMC. I hope the next path in the next version, when version 5 comes out eventually, we will go back to not having a new path, but expand on a bit more of our older paths. Because at this point, for example, I don't even know what Abundance does. Now, I also don't really know what Preservation does. Because like sustains in the sustain class in HSR is completely useless. Since you don't even really care about what that role is, it's either you pull for a dedicated unit in that specific path, or just a more generalist unit where the paths don't matter. So for that, if we can go back and tidy things up a little bit, that would be very, very nice. Or the introduction of dual path units. I think dual path units will make things very, very, like, imagine like Pokemon, right? You can like change out your units in battle. So in HSR, you can change out your unit's path element and use the different kits based on the environment. And I took inspiration of this from Brown Dust 2. Because in Brown Dust 2, one unit can have 2 ultimates because it's 2 different skins. Right? 2 different costumes. So depending if you want to use that specific one for like a buff, or if you want to use another costume for like a DPS, that will make things very, very flexible, because you can't really maintain this game on just 4 unit team building without adding some kind of more mechanics to add in more units within your roster. Alright, so that is pretty much it. Let me know what you guys think and thoughts and comments down below. I wonder what my editor is going to be using for this B-roll footage. So word of the day is going to be Abundance. Wait, hold up. League? Okay, word of the day is I legitimately don't look at League, so stop saying that. Join Discord, use code POKE for 10% of gamer subs, all the best for your gacha boost. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you. Wait, bloopers. I see. What happened to Firefly? That is very, very good. Godfly is Godfly.